the glass made a sound when it touched the bar that nobody heard because nobody was there to hear it. That was the point. The man holding the glass had spent 30 years making sure every room he'd entered was full of people who wanted to be near him, and tonight he had spent 45 minutes making sure this room was empty. He had dismissed the bartender at 11:30, tipped him enough to forget the hour and remember the generosity. He had locked the door to the showroom hallway so none of the hangers-on could drift back like smoke from a party he had already put out. He had loosened his tie, unbuttoned his collar, removed his cufflinks and set them on the bar next to an ashtray he had not used yet, but would before the night was over. He had poured 3 fingers of Jack Daniels into a glass that was heavier than it needed to be, because this was a bar that understood the relationship between the weight of a glass and the seriousness of what a man was doing with it. And then he sat. Not the way he sat in front of cameras, with the lean and the angle and the jaw and the eyes that had been selling songs to America since before most of America had a television set. He sat the way a man sits when the performance is over and the audience is gone and the body is finally allowed to be a body instead of an instrument. His shoulders dropped 3 inches, his spine curved. His hands found the glass the way hands find familiar things in the dark, by memory, by shape, by the specific weight of something you have held 10,000 times. He turned the glass clockwise on the bar, a quarter turn. Sip, a quarter turn. Sip, a habit so old it had become invisible to him, the way your heartbeat is invisible to you, always present, never noticed, performing its function in the background of everything you do. He had been rotating glasses this way since a bar in Hoboken when he was 19 years old, and the bartender was the first person outside his family who told him his voice was going to matter. The rotation started that night. It had never stopped. It was the one constant in a life that had changed so completely and so many times that sometimes he caught his own reflection in a mirror and needed a full second to remember which version of himself he was currently expected to be. Tonight, he was no version. Tonight, he was the man underneath all the versions, the one who existed in the space between performances, the one that nobody paid to see and nobody asked about and nobody photographed, the man who sat in private bars after midnight and drank alone because alone was the only place where he did not have to sing. The room was a jewel box, dark mahogany walls, a bar that seated 12 but rarely held more than 3 because this room was not for crowds. It was for the man who owned the crowd. A piano sat in the far corner, a baby grand, lid closed, bench pushed in, untouched tonight, sitting in the low light like a sleeping animal. 3 pendant lamps hung above the bar, casting amber pools on the wood that overlapped and left the edges of the room in soft darkness. The carpet was burgundy, the ceiling was low, the air smelled like old wood and good whiskey, and the faintest trace of cologne that the man had applied 12 hours ago before walking on stage and that had been slowly dying on his skin ever since, the way applause dies, gradually, and then all at once, and then you are standing in a room where the air smells like the ghost of who you were 3 hours ago. He was 57 years old. His voice was still the best voice in any room he entered, but his body had started charging interest on 40 years of cigarettes and whiskey, and late nights, and the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from being wanted by everyone and known by almost no one. His knuckles ached when it rained. His back complained when he sat too long. His eyes, which had once been described by a journalist as the color of a promise you knew would be broken, were tired tonight. Not sleepy, tired, the kind of tired that sleep does not fix because it is not the body that is tired. It is the thing that drives the body, the engine, the want, the reason to walk on stage and open your mouth and give strangers the most private parts of yourself, set to music and then walk off and do it again tomorrow, as if the giving cost nothing. It cost everything. He just had a large account. He was alone, and the alone felt like a room inside a room, 4 walls of silence inside 4 walls of mahogany. He could hear the casino floor, distantly, the way you hear the ocean from a hotel room that the brochure described as oceanfront, but that is really 3 buildings back. Slot machines, laughter, the particular frequency of a crowd that is losing money and enjoying it. That sound was his livelihood and his prison, and tonight it was wallpaper. A pattern he no longer saw because it had been on the walls of every room he had occupied for 30 years. He was on his 4th glass, or his 5th. He had stopped counting because counting was a form of judgment, and he had dismissed the bartender specifically so that no one would be counting. The whiskey was doing what whiskey does for men who drink alone, which is not numbing the pain but lowering the volume on the voice that narrates the pain, so that the pain is still there but the commentary is softer and softer, until eventually the man and his pain are sitting together in a quiet room like two old friends who have run out of things to argue about. 11:58 p.m. The door opened. Not the showroom door. He had locked that. The other door. The one that connected to a service hallway that ran behind the hotel's main corridor, a passage used by staff and maintenance, and occasionally by guests who had wandered off the designated path and ended up in parts of the building that were not designed for wandering. The door had a handle but no lock, which was an oversight that the man at the bar had not thought to address, because in 30 years of using this room, nobody had ever come through that door uninvited. The door opened and the hallway light entered for 1 second, a thin rectangle of fluorescent white that fell across the burgundy carpet like a blade, and then the door closed and the rectangle vanished, and in its place was a man. The man was standing just inside the room. He had entered quietly enough that the door's closing was louder than his arrival, which was unusual because doors are designed to be quieter than people, and this door had lost that contest. He wore a black shirt, black trousers, dark shoes that appeared to have no interest in announcing themselves on any surface. He was not tall, he was not wide. He occupied space the way a period occupies a sentence, minimally, but with a finality that made everything around it reorganize. He looked at the room. His eyes moved in a pattern that was too efficient to be casual. The bar, the bottles, the pendant lamps, the piano, the man sitting at the bar with a glass in his hand and a collar open, and cufflinks sitting on the wood like two small silver witnesses to a private unraveling. He saw all of this in approximately 2 seconds, because his eyes had been trained to see rooms the way most people see faces, as complete pictures rather than collections of details, and the complete picture of this room was a man who wanted to be alone and a door that had disagreed with him. The man at the bar looked up. What happened next lasted 4 seconds and contained an entire conversation about territory, authority, exhaustion, and the specific kind of irritation that occurs when a man who has spent an hour building a fortress of solitude watches a stranger walk through a wall he forgot to build. "Bar is closed," the man at the bar said. His voice was unmistakable, even at this volume, even in this room, even aimed at a stranger with the casual hostility of a man who is protecting something fragile. The voice had texture, it had history, it had the particular resonance of vocal cords that had vibrated against each other millions of times and developed a relationship with air that other voices could imitate but never replicate. Even saying 3 words about a bar being closed, the voice made the sentence sound like the opening line of a song you would pay to hear the rest of. The man in the black shirt did not stop walking. He moved toward the bar with the unhurried pace of someone who had heard the words and processed them and decided they were not relevant to his trajectory. He said, "The door was open." 4 words, delivered without challenge, without aggression, without the particular tonal defiance that men use when they are testing another man's authority. The words were factual. The door was in fact open. The man had walked through it. The logic was sound. The logic was also infuriating because the man at the bar was not making a logical argument. He was making a territorial one. And territory does not respond to logic. Territory responds to force, or presence, or the willingness to stand in a space and behave as though you belong there until the space agrees with you. The man at the bar set his glass down. The glass on mahogany sound again, but different this time, harder. A period at the end of a sentence that was about to become an argument. That does not mean you are invited. The man in the black shirt sat down, 2 stools away, not next to the man at the bar, not at the far end, 2 stools away. The distance was so precise it felt measured, as though the man had calculated the exact number of stools that separated intrusion from company and chosen the border between them. 1 stool closer would have been a statement. 1 stool further would have been an insult. 2 stools was a question asked without words. A question that said, "I am here, and I am not leaving, but I am also not assuming that my presence is welcome, and the next move is yours." The man at the bar stared at him. He was not accustomed to being ignored. He was not accustomed to giving a command and watching it be received and processed and discarded like junk mail. He was accustomed to rooms that reorganized themselves when he spoke, not because he demanded it, but because his voice carried 30 years of authority, and most people responded to authority the way most plants respond to sunlight, automatically, without deciding to, turning toward the source, because the turning was built into them. This man had not turned. This man had sat down 2 stools away and was now looking at the bottles behind the bar with the calm attention of someone who had walked into a museum and was examining the exhibits. His hands were on the bar, resting, fingers slightly open. His posture was straight but not rigid. He breathed the way no one in this building breathed, slowly, deeply, with a rhythm that suggested his lungs and his mind had a relationship that most people's lungs and minds did not, a partnership rather than a hierarchy. The man at the bar considered his options. He could demand the stranger leave. He had done this before, to larger men, to more important men, to men who had entourages and reputations and legal teams. He could make a phone call and have someone escort the man out within 2 minutes. He could stand up and use the voice, the real voice, the one that was not singing but commanding, the one that made powerful men sit down and foolish men reconsider, and brave men remember that there were different kinds of bravery, and not all of them involved standing your ground. He did none of these things. He picked up his glass, he took a sip, he turned the glass clockwise a quarter turn, and the reason he did none of these things was not kindness. It was not curiosity. It was not generosity of spirit. It was exhaustion, the deep, marrow-level exhaustion of a man who had been performing authority for so long that the performance had worn a groove in him, and tonight the groove was empty, and he could not find the energy to fill it. Throwing someone out required being someone. Being someone required putting the costume back on. The costume was on the bar next to the cufflinks and the ashtray, and he could not reach it, not tonight. So he sat, and the stranger sat, and the room held them both the way a boat holds 2 passengers, who did not choose each other but are headed in the same direction across water that does not care who is on board. The clock behind the bar said 11:59. The minute hand moved to 12, midnight. The stranger had not spoken again, had not ordered a drink, had not looked at the man at the bar, had not explained himself or apologized or performed any of the social rituals that people perform when they enter a space that belongs to someone else. He simply sat, and his sitting was so complete, so free of agenda, so absent of the particular anxiety that most people carry into unfamiliar rooms, that it began to change the texture of the silence, the way a single instrument changes the texture of an orchestra. Not louder, not different in volume, different in quality. The silence had been lonely. Now it was shared, and shared silence is a different animal entirely. Shared silence has warmth in it. Shared silence has the particular mercy of 2 people agreeing, without discussion, that the space between them does not need to be filled, that the air is sufficient, that the nothing is enough. 5 minutes passed. The man at the bar realized he had stopped turning his glass. The clockwise rotation that had accompanied every drink for 38 years had stopped. He did not know when. He looked at the glass. It sat on the bar at an angle that was somewhere between the last quarter turn and the next one, frozen mid-rotation, paused in a position it had never occupied before because it had never been stopped mid-turn before. The glass was always in motion or being lifted, never still, and now it was still. He looked at the stranger 2 stools away. The stranger was looking at the piano, not at the man at the bar, at the piano, the baby grand in the corner with its lid closed and its bench pushed in. The stranger was looking at it the way people look at things that contain more than their physical dimensions suggest, the way you look at a locked diary, or a photograph of someone who is gone, or a house where you used to live. He was seeing something in the piano that was not the piano. He was seeing the sound it was not making, the music it was holding inside itself, the potential that sat in the strings and the hammers and the felt and the wood, waiting, patient, making no demands, requiring nothing except to be played, and even that requirement was gentle, more invitation than insistence. 10 minutes, 12, 15. The man at the bar spoke. He spoke because the silence had become a living thing, and living things eventually need to be acknowledged. He spoke because 15 minutes of sitting with a stranger who wanted nothing had cracked something open in him that he did not know was sealed. He spoke because he was Frank Sinatra, and Frank Sinatra always spoke first. And even tonight, in this room, emptied of everything except a glass and a stranger and a piano and the exhaustion of a man who had given his voice to the world and kept almost nothing for himself. Even tonight the instinct was there, faint, flickering, but there. You do not talk much, he said. The stranger turned his head. For the first time in 15 minutes, he looked directly at the man at the bar. His eyes were dark and calm and carried the particular quality of eyes that have seen violence and chosen gentleness, not because gentleness is easier, but because it is harder, and this man had a preference for hard things done quietly. He said 5 words, "You do not need me to." The words landed in the room the way the last note of a song lands in a concert hall. Not loudly, not softly, exactly. They filled the space they were meant to fill, and did not spill over into the space that was meant to remain empty. They were the most precisely delivered 5 words the man at the bar had heard in a decade, and he had spent the last decade surrounded by songwriters and poets and screenwriters and presidents, and none of them had said anything that fit this well. He laughed, not the Frank Sinatra laugh, not the laugh from the stage, the one that was designed to include the audience, to make them feel that they were sharing a moment with him, the generous laugh, the public laugh, the laugh that had a job to do. This laugh came from somewhere deeper and less furnished, a room in his chest that had not been opened in a long time, because the door was behind several heavy things that he had placed there deliberately so that he would not accidentally wander in and find out what was inside. The laugh surprised him. He felt it leave his body the way you feel a bird leave your hand, suddenly, upward, gone before you can decide whether you wanted to keep it. It was short, it was real, and it changed the room the way a window changes a room when you open it and realize the air inside has been stale for hours, and you had stopped noticing because you were breathing it. The stranger watched him laugh, and on the stranger's face was something that was not a smile, and was not satisfaction, and was not smugness. It was recognition, the face of a man who has just seen another man do something honest, and is quietly grateful to have been in the room when it happened. The man at the bar picked up his glass. He looked at it. He looked at the stranger. He made a decision that he did not know he was making, a decision that lived below the part of the brain that deliberates, and instead lived in the part that simply knows. He reached behind the bar and pulled out a second glass, heavy, like his. He poured 3 fingers of Jack Daniels. He set the glass on the bar, not next to himself, not next to the stranger, on the stool between them. The empty stool, the border, the question mark made of leather and chrome that had been sitting between them for 15 minutes, asking a question that neither of them had answered. The glass sat on the stool like a bridge. The stranger looked at it. He looked at the man who had poured it, and for the first time since he walked through the service door of a private bar in a Las Vegas hotel at 11:58, on a night that neither of them would ever talk about, the stranger smiled. He did not pick up the glass, but he did not need to. The glass was not an offer to drink. It was an offer to stay, and staying was the thing that the man at the bar had not known. He was asking for until he found himself pouring a drink for a stranger and placing it on the chair between them like a candle in a window. The stranger stayed, and the night continued, and the clock moved past midnight into the hours that do not belong to performers or audiences or anyone with somewhere to be, the hours that belong only to people who have decided for reasons they may never fully understand that the person 2 stools away is worth sitting with in silence, in a room that smells like whiskey and old wood, while a piano sleeps in the corner and the city outside keeps spinning without them. The man at the bar refilled his glass. The stranger's glass sat untouched on the stool between them, the whiskey catching the amber light from the pendant lamps and holding it the way a church window holds sunlight, turning something ordinary into something that looks like it means more than it should. The ice had begun to melt. A thin ring of water formed on the leather seat beneath it, growing slowly, a clock made of condensation marking time in a room where the real clock had stopped mattering, somewhere around 12:30. The stranger had not touched the glass, and the man at the bar had not mentioned it, and this small mutual agreement, the pouring and the not drinking and the not discussing either, had become the foundation of whatever was being built between them. Some foundations are made of concrete. This one was made of whiskey nobody drank, and silence nobody broke, and the particular trust that forms when 2 people refuse to perform for each other. The man at the bar lit a cigarette. The match flared, and for a moment the room was brighter, and the stranger's face was visible in full. The sharp angles, the calm mouth, the eyes that were watching the match, the way a man watches a small fire in the dark, not with fear, but with the appreciation of someone who understands what fire is and what it costs and what it gives. The match died. The cigarette glowed. Smoke rose in a line so straight it looked drawn, rising until it reached the ceiling and spread into a thin cloud that drifted toward the piano and hung there like a thought that had not yet decided whether to become a sentence. "You are not from here," the man at the bar said. Not a question, an observation. The way a doctor observes a symptom, the way a singer hears a note that is slightly different from the notes around it, and knows exactly how different and exactly why. "No," the stranger said. "Where?" "San Francisco, Hong Kong before that." Hong Kong. The man at the bar turned the word over the way he turned the glass, slowly, feeling its weight. "I played Hong Kong once, 62. The crowd was polite. Polite crowds are the worst. They clap when they are supposed to, instead of when they feel it. I would rather be booed by an honest room than applauded by a polite one." The stranger nodded, a small nod, the kind of nod that means I understand this more than you know, and I am not going to explain why, because the explanation would take longer than the understanding. "What do you do?" the man at the bar asked. He asked it casually, the way you ask someone at a bus stop, not because you care deeply, but because the silence had become comfortable enough to risk a question that might make it uncomfortable. "I teach," the stranger said. "Teach what?" "How to move." The man at the bar exhaled smoke. "Like dance?" "No." "Like what then?" The stranger paused. He was choosing a word. The man at the bar recognized the pause because he did it himself before certain lyrics. The micro-hesitation where the mouth waits for the brain to deliver exactly the right syllable, because approximately right is worse than silence. "Like surviving," the stranger said. The man at the bar looked at him. Really looked. Not the glance he had been giving for the past 20 minutes. The peripheral assessment, the measuring of a stranger by his edges. This was a direct look, eyes to eyes. And what he saw in the stranger's eyes was something he recognized, because he saw it in the mirror every morning, a calmness that was not natural but built, constructed over years from materials that included pain and repetition, and the specific kind of loneliness that comes from being excellent at something that most people will never understand. "Surviving." The man at the bar repeated. "I have been doing that for 30 years. Nobody ever taught me. I just kept showing up." "That is one method," the stranger said. "Is there another? Showing up without losing pieces of yourself on the way in." The man at the bar's cigarette paused halfway to his mouth. The smoke curled around his fingers. He brought the cigarette the rest of the way, and took a drag that was longer than the ones before it, the kind of drag that is not about nicotine but about buying 3 seconds to process something that landed harder than expected. "You always talk like that," he said. "Like what? Like a fortune cookie that went to college?" The stranger laughed. The laugh was quick and bright and unexpected, a flash of something warm in a man who the bar's dim light had been painting as serious and still. The laugh changed his face completely. It made him younger. It made the room younger. It made the man at the bar realize that the stranger had been holding the laugh inside for some time, not because he was humorless, but because he had been waiting for something worth releasing it for, and a fortune cookie that went to college was apparently worth it. The man at the bar smiled. Not the stage smile, the real one. The one that was slightly crooked and showed a chip on his left incisor that his dentist had offered to fix 4 times, and that he had declined 4 times because the chip was from a fight in Hoboken in 1939, and it was the only souvenir from his old life that he carried on his face. And some souvenirs are worth more broken than repaired. Something unlocked in the room. The laughter had turned a key that 15 minutes of silence had slowly been inserting into a lock that neither of them knew existed until it opened. The formality was gone. The territory was gone. The stranger was no longer a stranger, and the man at the bar was no longer a man at a bar. They were 2 people in a room at an hour when most people are asleep, and the ones who are not asleep are either in trouble or in the middle of something they will remember for a long time. This was the second kind. They talked, not about music, not about martial arts, not yet. They talked about the things men talk about when the walls come down at 1 in the morning in a room that smells like whiskey and smoke, and the specific freedom of being temporarily unknown. They talked about Las Vegas. The stranger said the city felt like a watch that was always wound too tight. The man at the bar said that was exactly why he lived here part of the year, because the tightness of the city made the looseness of his private rooms feel like a vacation, and a man who performs for a living needs vacations from everything including relaxation, and the only way to relax is to surround yourself with tension and step outside of it, which is what this room was. A step outside. The stranger said, "You built a room to escape the room you built." The man at the bar considered this. "Yes," he said, "and now you are in it. I can leave. I know you can. That is why I am not asking you to." 12:45 became 1:15. 1:15 became 1:45. The glasses stayed where they were. The man at the bar poured himself a sixth or seventh, and the stranger's glass on the stool between them continued its slow melting, the ice now half its original size, the whiskey diluted to a pale amber, the ring of water on the leather seat expanding in a perfect circle that neither of them looked at but both of them were aware of, the way you are aware of a candle burning in a room, even when you are not watching the flame. The conversation found its way to fathers, the way conversations between men of a certain depth always find their way to fathers, not by design but by gravity, the way water finds the lowest point in a landscape. My old man was a fireman, the man at the bar said, and a boxer, not a good boxer, a tough boxer. There is a difference. A good boxer wins, a tough boxer does not lose the same way twice. My old man never won a fight worth talking about, but he never got knocked out the same way twice, and that is a kind of genius that nobody puts on a trophy. The stranger was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father was an opera singer." The man at the bar turned on his stool. A full turn, not a glance, a reorientation, the body language of a man who has just heard something that changed the geometry of the conversation. "Opera," he said, "Cantonese opera, different from what you are thinking, but the same in the way that matters." "What way is that?" "A man stands on a stage and opens his mouth, and what comes out is not him. It is something that lives inside him, that needs his body to escape. He is the door. The music is the thing that walks through it." The man at the bar did not speak for 10 seconds. 10 seconds is a long time in a conversation. It is an eternity in a conversation between two men who have been talking for an hour and have found a rhythm and a flow. 10 seconds of silence in the middle of that flow is a rock in a river. The water has to go around it, and going around it changes the direction of everything that comes after. "Say that again," the man at the bar said. "Which part?" "The door part. The part about being the door." The stranger said it again, the same words. But different, the way a song is different the second time you hear it, because the first time you heard the melody and the second time you hear the meaning. The man at the bar put his cigarette out. He pressed it into the ashtray and held it there longer than necessary, grinding it, which was not about extinguishing the cigarette. It was about having something to do with his hands while his chest processed something it had not been prepared to receive. "I have been singing for 35 years, he said, "and I have never once described it that way. But that is exactly what it is. You are the door. The song walks through you, and some nights the door is open, and the song walks through easy, and the audience gets the best of you. And some nights the door is stuck, and the song has to force its way through, and the audience gets something raw and rough and broken, and those are the nights they remember, because broken sounds like truth, and truth is the only thing an audience cannot buy at the gift shop on the way out." He paused. "Tonight the door is closed," he said. "I closed it on purpose. I closed it because I am tired of things walking through me. Songs, expectations, demands, the name, the face, the voice. Everything walks through me, and I am tired of being the hallway. I want to be the room. I want to be the place where things stay, instead of the place where things pass through." The room was very quiet. The refrigerator behind the bar had stopped cycling. The casino floor noise had faded to nothing, either because the gamblers had gone home or because the walls of this room had decided to stop letting the sound in. The only sound was the faint tick of ice shifting in the untouched glass on the stool between them. The glass that had been poured as a bridge and had become instead a witness, sitting between two men who were saying things to each other they had not said to anyone, because the hour was late and the room was dark and the stranger wanted nothing, and wanting nothing had created a space where everything could be said. The stranger looked at the man at the bar. He looked at him with the full attention that he gave to everything, which was more attention than most people gave to anything, a level of focus that could feel intrusive if it came from someone with an agenda, but felt instead like shelter, because it came from someone with none. "A hallway is not less than a room," the stranger said. "A hallway is what connects the rooms. Without the hallway, the rooms are just boxes, isolated, silent. You are not tired of being the hallway. You are tired of walking through yourself and never stopping to see what is on the walls. 2 o'clock, 2:30, 3. The conversation moved through subjects the way a river moves through landscape, following whatever contour the terrain offered. Loneliness. Not the word, but the shape of it. The man at the bar described what it felt like to leave a stage where thousands of people were screaming his name and walk into a room where no one was. The distance between those two rooms was 30 feet and 30 years, and he traveled it every night, and every night it got longer. The stranger described what it felt like to be surrounded by students who treated him like he had answers, and the terror that they might be right, that the art might actually live in him, and one day it might leave, and he would be standing in a room full of people who came to see something that was no longer there, wearing the body of a man who used to be the door and was now just the frame. 3:15, 3:30. The conversation found humor the way exhausted conversations always do, not by looking for it, but by tripping over it. The man at the bar told a story about a show in Atlantic City where his microphone died mid-song, and he kept singing, and the front row did not notice because they were watching his face, and his face was singing louder than his voice. The stranger told a story about a student who asked him what the most deadly strike in martial arts was, and he said a letter from the IRS, and the student did not laugh, and he knew immediately that the student would never be great, because greatness requires knowing what is funny, and a man who does not laugh at the absurdity of his own discipline will never master it. The man at the bar laughed so hard at the IRS line that he had to set his glass down to avoid spilling it, which was the first time all night the glass had been set down for a reason other than the clockwise rotation, and the disruption of the ritual felt like progress, like a small wall being taken down brick by brick by a stranger who did not know he was demolishing anything because he was just sitting on a stool telling a joke about taxes. 3:45, the man at the bar went quiet, a different quiet from before. The first silence at the beginning of the night had been defensive, a moat. This silence was the opposite. This was the silence of a man standing at the edge of something, looking down, deciding whether to jump, knowing the water below might be deep enough to catch him or shallow enough to break him, and there was only one way to find out. He stood up. He did not announce what he was doing. He did not say, "Watch this," or "Listen to this," or "Let me show you something." He stood up and walked to the piano. His feet on the carpet were quiet. His hand found the lid of the baby grand. He lifted it. The hinge was smooth, and the lid rose without resistance, and the piano opened the way a man opens when he has decided to stop protecting the thing inside him that is most valuable and most vulnerable. He did not sit on the bench. He stood beside the piano with one hand on the edge of the open lid, fingers resting on the lacquered wood, and he breathed in, and the breath was not the breath of a man about to perform. It was the breath of a man about to confess. There is a difference. Performance breathes in from the chest. Confession breathes in from the stomach, from the place where the oldest truths are stored, below the ribs, below the diaphragm, in the dark, warm place where the body keeps the things the mind has tried to forget. He sang one verse, not a full song, one verse of something that the stranger did not recognize because it was not meant to be recognized. It was a song from 1941, a song he had recorded in a studio in New York when he was 25 years old, and terrified and thrilled and so new to his own voice that every note felt like a discovery rather than a skill. The song was never released. The label said it was too quiet, too personal, not enough orchestra, not enough production, not enough of the things that sold records in 1941. He had kept the melody in his chest for 32 years, taking it out occasionally in private, in rooms like this one, at hours like this one, singing it to no one, which was the only audience the song had ever been meant for. The verse lasted 40 seconds. The stranger closed his eyes. He closed them the way you close a door when you want to make sure nothing leaves the room, not to shut things out, to keep things in. His face, which had been calm all night, shifted into something that was beyond calm, a stillness so deep it looked like prayer. He was not just listening with his ears, he was listening with the architecture of his entire body, the way he listened to everything, with a completeness that left no part of him unoccupied by the sound. The last note left the man's mouth and entered the room, and the room held it. The pendant lamps held it. The mahogany walls held it. The bottles behind the bar held it. The piano held it in its open body the way a cathedral holds the last note of a choir, not by trapping it, but by giving it space to exist fully before it faded. The note faded. It took a long time. The room was unwilling to let it go. Silence. The man at the piano kept his hand on the lid, his fingers pressed slightly into the wood. His eyes were closed now too. Two men in a room with their eyes closed, and a song dissolving in the air between them, and a glass of whiskey melting on a stool, and a clock that said 3:52, and a world outside that was still spinning, and did not know that in a private bar in Las Vegas, something had just happened that would never happen again, because the conditions that created it, the exhaustion and the open door, and the stranger who wanted nothing, and the hour that belonged to no one, those conditions were as fragile and temporary as the note that had just faded, and could not be reconstructed any more than a wave can be put back into the ocean after it has broken on the shore. The man at the piano opened his eyes. "That was for free," he said. "Do not tell anyone." The stranger opened his eyes. "I will not." And he never did. The man at the piano lowered the lid. The hinge moved smoothly. The piano closed. The animal went back to sleep. He walked back to the bar. He sat down. He picked up his glass. He did not turn it. He just held it. The rotation that had been running for 38 years had stopped somewhere in the middle of the night and had not restarted, and he was not sure if he wanted it to. 4 a.m. The man at the bar stood. He buttoned one button on his jacket, just one. The minimum gesture of reassembly, enough to walk through a hallway, not enough to walk onto a stage. He looked at the stranger. He did not say anything grand. He did not say anything wise. He did not deliver a closing line that would look good on a poster or sound good in a biography. He said the smallest possible thing, the thing that contained everything precisely because it contained almost nothing. "Good night," the stranger said. "Good night." The man at the bar walked to the door, the showroom door, not the service door. He unlocked it. He opened it. The hallway light entered, brighter than the room, the light of a world that was still expecting him to be someone. He stepped into it. The door closed behind him. His footsteps moved down the hallway, solid and measured, the walk of a man who had been walking away from stages for 30 years, and toward them for 30 years, and tonight could not tell the difference between the two directions. The stranger sat alone. The room was different now, not emptier, rearranged. The way a room rearranges itself when a song has been sung in it, and the song is gone, but the air remembers the shape of the sound and holds that shape the way sand holds the shape of a wave after the water has retreated. He looked at the glass on the stool, the glass that had been poured for him and that he had never touched. The ice was gone. The whiskey was room temperature. The ring of water on the leather seat had expanded to a full circle. He reached over. He did not pick up the glass. He placed 2 fingers on its rim and turned it, clockwise, 1/4 turn. Then he stood up and left. The bar was empty. The pendant lamps hummed. The piano slept. The cigarette in the ashtray had been ground down to nothing. The 2 glasses sat on the mahogany, one that had been drained and refilled and drained again by a man who needed the weight of it in his hand, and one that had been poured and never touched, and then turned 1/4 by a hand that did not belong to the man who poured it. At 6 in the morning, a cleaning woman entered through the service door. She wiped the bar. She washed the glasses. She emptied the ashtray. She wiped the ring of water from the stool where a glass had been sitting all night, in a place where glasses do not usually sit. She did not think about it. She had cleaned this room hundreds of times. It was always the same. A glass, an ashtray, the smell of whiskey and smoke and cologne. The evidence of a man who sat alone after the show and left before the morning found him. But this morning the piano lid was open. She paused. In hundreds of cleanings the lid had never been open. She walked to it. She looked inside at the strings and the hammers and the felt, the interior of an instrument that most people never see because the lid is always closed. She reached for the lid to close it. She stopped. Something about the room, something in the air that she could not name but could feel, the way you feel that someone has been crying in a room even after they have left, and the tears are dry, and the evidence is gone, except for a weight in the air that should not be there. She left the lid open. She finished cleaning. She turned off the pendant lamps. She closed the service door behind her. The room went dark. The piano sat with its lid open, and its strings exposed, and its hammers resting, and somewhere in those strings the last vibration of a note sung at 3:52 in the morning by a man who had not sung that song for anyone in 32 years was still fading, still travelling through the wire and the wood and the air, getting quieter and quieter but never quite reaching silence. Some sounds do not end, they just get quieter than the world around them. And if you sit still long enough in a room where one was made, you might hear it. Not with your ears, with the part of you that knows what it sounds like when a man stops performing and starts telling the truth. The stranger drove back to his hotel as the sun came up over the desert. The light in Las Vegas at dawn is different from the light anywhere else. It is apologetic, thin, the light of a city that knows what it did last night and is not sure it wants to be seen this clearly this early. He parked, he walked to his room, he sat on the edge of the bed, he thought about the song. He would never know its name. He would never hear it again. It existed now only in his memory, and memory is an imperfect container that changes the shape of everything it holds, softening edges, brightening colors, making the beautiful more beautiful, and the sad more sad, until the thing you remember is not the thing that happened, but the thing you needed to have happened. He knew this. He accepted it. The song in his memory would not be the song that was sung. It would be better. It would be worse. It would be his. He did not tell anyone, not Linda, not his students, not the friends who would have loved the story, the detail about the private bar and the whiskey, and the voice that even at a whisper filled a room the way water fills a glass, completely, without effort, without waste. He kept it, not as a secret, as a gift, because the man who sang it had said, "Do not tell anyone," and the stranger understood that this was not a request for secrecy. It was a request for sacredness. Some things are sacred not because they are holy, but because they happened once and will not happen again. And the only way to honor them is to let them exist in the one place where they cannot be diminished. Silence. Years later, after the stranger was gone, his wife found a notebook in his desk. She had found many notebooks. They were full of philosophy and technique, and the precise mechanical language of a man who turned movement into science. But in the back of one notebook, on a page that had been torn out and reinserted and folded once, was a single sentence written in handwriting that was less controlled than his usual hand, as though the pen had been moving faster than the thoughts could organize themselves. The sentence said, "A man sang a song for me that no one has heard, and I closed my eyes, and when I opened them I understood that the silence after music is not empty. It is full of everything the music was trying to say and could not." She did not know what it meant. She kept the page. She kept it because it was his, and because the handwriting was shaky, because shaky handwriting from a man whose hands never shook meant that whatever he was writing about had moved something in him that did not usually move. She never learned who sang the song. She never learned what song it was. The page did not say. The silence that the stranger kept was so complete that even his own notebook only held the echo of it. One sentence, written fast, about a sound that existed now only in the memory of a man who was gone, and a room that had been renovated, and a piano that had been moved, and a glass of whiskey that was poured and never touched and turned 1/4 clockwise by a hand that understood that some rotations are not habits, they are prayers.